Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. Welcome to part 3 of this lesson on artifacts and workflows. We continue now with our procurement management artifacts. These include the procurement management plan, also your procurement strategy, your bid documents, your procurement statement of work, source selection criteria, make or buy decisions, also perhaps an independent cost estimate, one or more independent cost estimates, your list of selected sellers, your agreements that you have in place, and closed procurements. Most of your procurement management artifacts are front-loaded in the planned procurement management process. This process has as its outputs the procurement management plan, naturally, but also your procurement strategy, all of your bid documents, your procurement statement of work, your source selection criteria, your make or buy decisions, and independent cost estimates. All of this in your planned procurement management process. This leaves your other procurement management processes comparatively lightweight when it comes to outputs. Your other procurement management processes are conduct procurements and control procurements. Of course, in order to conduct your procurements, the whole point of this process is to decide who you're going to work with. Your output of this is naturally your agreements. Your main input are the proposals from all of the different sellers. Seller proposals as inputs, agreements as outputs. In order to control your procurements, you'll need to consult with the agreements. And control procurements has as its main output closed procurements. This is important to note. This is the one interesting exception. Closing procurements used to be part of closing a project, but not anymore. It has been moved to here. It's here in procurement management, in control procurements, that you close your procurements. Your stakeholder engagement artifacts are straightforward. You have your stakeholder register, which is an output, the main output of your identify stakeholders process. And key to this are the categorizations of stakeholders. Remember, we talked about directions of influence, grids, stakeholder cubes, and the salience model. These categorizations belong in the stakeholder register and are determined during identify stakeholders. This naturally would be an input to your stakeholder engagement plan and the process called planned stakeholder engagement. There are a fair number of integration management artifacts, starting with the project management plan, but also including your change log, your approved change requests, your assumption log, your issue log, your lessons learned register, work performance data, work performance reports, your final report, as well as project deliverables, and your final product, service, or result transition, which is the goal of your project. Notice that several of these feel something like miscellaneous artifacts, and that's why they're in with integration management, because they cover more than just one knowledge area, or they don't particularly fit in any one knowledge area. Let's start with the integration management process of develop the project management plan. Now that you know what's in the project management plan, you understand better and can more easily enumerate those things that are natural outputs of the process of develop project management plan. These include all the subsidiary plans, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, procurement, and stakeholder management or engagement plans, which all roll up into the project management plan. Also included are the change management plan and configuration management plan, as well as project baselines, the project lifecycle, the development approach, and your schedule of management reviews. The close project or phase process is part of integration management and has as its output the final product, service, or result transition, plus the final report. Remember that procurements are not closed in this process as they used to be, but are instead now part of the control procurements process. Now, here's a workflow that you won't see in the PMBOK guide because it comes from many different places scattered throughout the guide. But it's important to understand how these things all connect. These are about the deliverables. How do deliverables flow through all of the different project management processes? First of all, you have the direct and manage project work process, which is part of integration management. It has as its main output deliverables, those pieces of project and product work or project intermediate deliverables that are important to be verified and accepted. So once those deliverables are created, it's the control quality process from the quality knowledge area that verifies those deliverables. You use the information in the quality requirements to make sure that those deliverables meet those quality requirements. And if they do, then those deliverables are then renamed as verified deliverables. But they've not yet been accepted by your customer. The next step is to have those deliverables accepted. That happens in the validate scope process, which is part of scope management. That process's main purpose is to review these deliverables with your key stakeholders and see that they accept those deliverables. Those accepted deliverables are then all gathered up and used as input to the close project or phase process, which is again part of integration, and together they form the final product, service, or result transition. And that's how deliverables flow through all of these processes. Notice that this is not immediately obvious because it bounces all over from one knowledge area to the other, from integration to quality to scope and back to integration again. An important note to add here is that once you have created deliverables from the direct and managed project work process, those deliverables fall under change control. Even before they've been verified using your quality control and before they've been accepted, a proposed deliverable that is ready now to be reviewed by the control quality process must first be put under change control. And your change control needs to be supported by the appropriate configuration management tools and procedures that guide how changes are made. In other words, if this deliverable that's been given to you goes through the control quality process and it turns out that it does not meet your quality standards, then you have to go back and fix that and rework it so that it does meet your control quality standards. But now, when you have another version of that deliverable ready for review, it's another version, and you keep separate copies. If it's code, for example, you would keep separate copies of these deliverables, and you wouldn't update that deliverable in your system, even in your test system, without first going through your change control and configuration management processes to properly control this change. Otherwise, you could have changes being made so frequently that cause unnecessary ripple effects throughout your project. The same goes for validate scope. Even though it may have passed your quality standards, if it doesn't pass the stakeholders and you need to go back and redo something, you shouldn't be changing that deliverable without following your change and configuration management processes. Change requests are another interesting artifact that can be difficult to follow how those flow through the processes. But looking at it as a whole, you'll find that change requests can be generated by just about any process. But no matter where they come from, they all go into the Perform Integrated Change Control process, which is part of integration management. And that process has it as its primary function to review those change requests and either approve or reject them. Once approved, those change requests are inputs to the direct and manage project work or control procurements processes. These are the two processes that manage making those changes. Direct and manage project work is the process you use if this is being done internally. And control procurements is the process that you use if this is a change that needs to be implemented by an outsourced vendor that you have a contract with that you've set up using the procurements knowledge area. There's another small artifact called the change log. It isn't specifically mentioned here, but knowing what you know, where would you put the change log? What would output a change log or changes to your change log? Naturally, it would be your Perform Integrated Change Control. Because if you're going to make a change, you've approved a change, you record that in your change log. A few other miscellaneous integration management artifacts include the assumption log, which, as you know, is an output of the develop project charter process. The issue log, which is an output of the direct and manage project work process, which makes sense because it's when you're directing and managing the project work that issues come up. The lessons learned register, which is an output of the manage project knowledge process, and the change log, which we just discussed as an output of the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Again, it makes sense that changes are recorded as part of the Perform Integrated Change Control process that approves or rejects changes, and that those changes are recorded in your change log. Another set of artifacts that creates a lot of confusion is the set of work performance data versus work performance information versus work performance reports. These are not interchangeable terms. They are distinct artifacts with distinct purposes. Work performance data are the raw observations and measurements of work performance, not analyzed or anything else yet, just the raw data. Work performance information takes this data and has now analyzed it and compared it with the plan, with the documents, and other information. Work performance reports then take this work performance information and compile it into project documents that are intended to generate decisions, action, or awareness. Now that you understand the difference between work performance data, information, and reports, now the question is, how do these interrelate and what processes convert data to information and information into reports? Here's the answer. Direct and manage project work. It's when you're managing this project work that you generate all of this work performance data. But that's not the process that analyzes the data. It's the monitoring and control processes that are responsible for this. And all of these processes generate work performance information. Each knowledge area has its own monitoring and controlling processes, and each generates work performance information that is specific to that knowledge area. All of this work performance information from all of these different knowledge areas is then an input to monitor and control project work, which is part of the integration knowledge area. And it's that one integration piece of monitor and control project work that brings this all together into work performance reports. Another point that can be a little confusing sometimes is the lessons learned register versus the lessons learned repository. In your project, you're going to learn things and you're going to want to record that as lessons learned. These learnings go into your lessons learned register. This register is specific to your project. Then, at key points or at the end of your project, these lessons learned from your project register go into the lessons learned repository, because the repository is part of your organizational process assets. And these lessons learned in your repository then cycle back and feed into future projects. This is why whenever you start a project, it's wise to consult your lessons learned repository within your organizational process assets to see what you can learn to help you properly structure and plan for your project. However, it's worth noting that it's far more valuable to integrate these learnings into your processes. At key points or at the end of your project, you shouldn't be left with just a repository. That information should be analyzed, and you should decide how your organization's processes should be modified in order to take advantage of those learnings and have those learnings embedded into your processes. In this lesson, we've introduced the concept that by learning your artifacts first and then the processes, it's a lot easier to learn all of these different processes that are part of the PMBOK Guide's process table. This helps you to understand the content and the relationships between all of these different artifacts, how the processes connect them, how the processes take them as inputs, modify them, or use them as inputs to create new outputs. Focus first on the artifacts, what's in them, how they're used, and then learning all the processes and inputs and outputs and tools and techniques will be much easier. Remember to focus on the primary inputs and outputs first, and then it'll be pretty easy to figure out the secondary inputs and outputs. This will leave you better prepared for the PMP exam, in which you'll see questions that are ITTO questions inside of situational questions. Questions that ask you, based on a certain scenario, what is the next thing you should do? Or what's the first thing you should do? Or where can you find this specific bit of information? Or this went wrong, what is the most likely thing that you forgot to do? Unfortunately, I don't have any specific references to give you in the PMBOK guide for all of this information because it comes from so many different places throughout the guide. However, don't worry, there are other lessons later on in this course that will continue to reinforce and review this focus on artifacts first and help you to remember all of these different processes so that you will be prepared for the PMP exam. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.